My name is Marie LeBlanc Flanagan. I make experimental video games, and I also work in the arts. I am on the board of a few different arts organizations. I serve as a juror a lot of the time in music and arts, and am on programming artistic communities. I have never worked for a AAA game studio. All of my game making is experimental games, DIY games, and small community-based game projects. When we're talking about the difference between games and the arts and what the arts might learn from games, I think it's helpful for me to differentiate who I'm speaking about, because obviously there are many different types of people making games, from people in their houses working alone after work to people who are running AAA studios with $1 million budgets, and the same goes for the arts. So I'd like to stop and take a second to differentiate between those two groups. So when I'm asking what can the arts learn from games, if we're talking about an indigenous DIY slam poetry community, probably they have very little to learn from me today. I don't want to say nothing, but probably very little. But if we're talking about an arts organization like some of the ones I've encountered over the years, who have hundreds of thousands of dollars of operational funding, or even tens of thousands of dollars of operational funding, and they're bemoaning the state of the world and blaming their social media in turn for shrinking audiences, then this is who I'm talking to today. I do think that an arts organization like this has a lot to learn from games. When we're talking about community cultivation with the arts, I find there's a tendency to either look at the patrons as people with good taste who are coming in because they like the art, or to look at the patrons as dollar bill signs. How do we convince them to buy more tickets? How do we convince them to donate more? And it's really not a mutual relationship. It feels more like the audience is a resource that the arts is trying to address. Whereas with games, the relationship is much more intricate, nuanced, and it's ongoing. There's a role for a person who loves a game. That role is the fan. I mean, it has lots of different names, but someone who loves a video game has a clear sense of what the possibility space is with that game. So someone who loves a video game can be a fan. They can join a Discord server, which is often an avenue for them to talk to other fans. It's an avenue for them to talk directly to the game developers and the game creators themselves. And they feel this deep connection to the art itself. They feel like they're a part of the art in a very deep and meaningful way. It's not shallow. Certainly they're donating. They pay into Kickstarters and Patreons, and they buy the games, and there's a lot of ways that they pay in, but they're not a resource, they're part of the ecosystem. And I think that can be a very valuable thing. That can also be a very toxic thing. Sometimes these gamers feel like they have complete entitlement over the art itself, and they can become very controlling, very aggressive about what they think the value of the art is. I mean, there is some danger here. I think this is a danger of late capitalism. I don't think it's a danger specific to games. But I think there's a lot to be learned about approaching this relationship to someone who loves the art or the game as like a mutual relationship of respect and as something that can grow. Community itself is often seen in the arts, in games, in corporate culture, all over, as this sort of watered down, soft thing. Like it's this, you're going to hire a community manager, it's not a very well paid role, it's traditionally very feminized work, and it's not really given a lot of respect. And this is really funny because the community, or like the relationships between people, are core to basically every part of existence, every part of like human health. What measurement do we have of like what makes people happy? It's almost always relationships. Relationships and community are core to everything that we do. And I think if you pin down any art person, they will acknowledge this. Community is core, community is key. And in games, the relationship of the community onto the art, the way that the community relates to the art, is very strong, and the community definitely shapes the art directly. Certainly there are game developers, game designers who have a vision that they implement, and they pretty much ignore everybody. That happens. But generally in game development and game design, because it's a medium where you need the audience. A game doesn't come to life until there's a player there. And like certainly people have talked about literature in this way, like Roland Barthes. People have talked about literature only coming alive when there's a reader, or theater only coming alive when there's an audience. But with games, it's the most explicit of all the art forms. You really need a player or else the game doesn't exist. And I think that's why there's this respect for community, or more of a respect for community, more of a respect for what that person brings, because there's an acknowledgement of how important it is. And because of this, when people are developing games, they bring in playtesters really early. When I'm making a game myself, these experimental DIY things, I'm barely making it functional before I'm bringing in people to play. For example, I made a big game that lasted a month in a whole city with many, many, many people and like a bigger budget. And still, before I even started coding a line, I gathered a bunch of people and gave them beans and string, and I was trying to document what connections might look like between people before I coded a line or before I solidified anything about design. And so in this way, for most game designers, the community feedback, or like the playtester feedback, working with people that are the kind of people that you want to make things for, is core to everything that you make. It shapes every decision you make from the beginning to the end. It's very iterative. It's very like, make a little bit, test it, try again. Make a little bit, test it, try again. Compared to the arts, where I find often there's more of a traditional approach of, okay, I have a vision, now I'm going to implement it. Maybe I'll run it by a few trusted advisors, and then I'm going to implement it some more. Or we're going to book an entire 5-year programming season with these types of people without testing out to see if there's an audience of people who are excited about that, who will like cultivate and grow that community. So I've done a lot of work thinking about how to reach people. The question of how to reach people is a problem that people who make any kind of art have. It's arts organizations have this problem. I mean, businesses have this problem. Certainly game designers and developers have this problem. How do we reach people? And the answer has often been marketing. That's how we reach people. And it's a bit funny because marketing itself can be split into so many different ways of thinking about things. Like at its core, I think a good marketing team has inputs back into the company or the studio or the arts organization, because if you're keeping an eye on what's happening, if you're the one with your finger on the pulse of what's happening, what people are wanting, what's resonating with people, it only makes sense that you should be reaching back in to the place where the things are happening, where like the design decisions are happening and the prioritization is happening. So discoverability, I mean, when I think about marketing and discoverability, I think we often lose the thread. We think we're going to make something and then we're going to find the people who like it. And actually, maybe the thread should be inverted, whereas we look, who do we have around us? Or who do we see right now? And what are they interested in? And so rather than discovering those people, allow yourself to, in some ways, become what those people need. Now, that said, I mean, I'm an artist. I'm not going to start making NFT tokens right now because that's what the people seem to want. That's just, it doesn't align with my needs and my desires and my values and how I feel about the world right in this moment. So I'm not saying that anyone should just become what the audience wants them to be. I'm not like a capitalist shill right now. I mean, what I'm saying is that discoverability, reaching people is not usually the problem. Like you can reach people. You can. There's social media, there are blog posts, there are journalists just like dying for content to write about. You can reach people. The question is, once you reach them, their eyeballs or their ears, are you actually reaching them in their heart, in their minds? Are you reaching them in a place where it's actually going to make an impact on them? So yeah, I would pull those two problems apart when we're talking about discoverability. The problem of, or how are you actually reaching people, which is often a budget problem. Okay, so I need ad money or I need this. And then how do you actually reach them at the end? Because it doesn't matter how many advertisements you have if you don't have a way to receive them when they arrive. So receive them by offering them something that's meaningful to them, but also receive them in like an active, ongoing way. And I'll just bring us back to Discord game servers again, which I don't even like them that much, but like the idea of it is wonderful. Here's a home. You like this thing that I'm doing. Here's a place. Here's a way that you can follow me. And in the case of Discord in games, this is a home that I, the game developer, own. I mean, I don't own the Discord platform, but I certainly own it a lot more than a Facebook page where suddenly the permissions can be changed and I'm not reaching my audience at all tomorrow. I'm a huge advocate for email lists, even though they're the worst, because it's a way that you can actually reach your people and there's no intermediary. There's no tech giant like looming over, breathing hot air down your neck as you try and reach the people who were excited about your work in the past. There's an interesting mushy middle ground between video games and arts. That is, arts more and more are recognizing that video games are art or can be art. We're starting to notice that there are types of video games that are definitely 100% art, and that there are video games that contain art and are maybe more commercial. Just like arty music, experimental music versus pop music stars on the radio. Both are art, but there's a little bit of a difference. We're starting to know that now with video games. But still, there are a lot of people like myself that occupy this mushy middle ground between art and video games. Video games being understood by a lot of funding bodies, by a lot of artists as this, like, I don't know, weird, flashy, corporate, non-art space. Like, I can't believe that we still have this conversation, but it's still happening. And a lot of video games people seeing experimental video games or art games or these games that kind of exist a little bit outside of the realm as not being games at all. I have had many people come to me at an exhibition and say, this is not a video game. Why can't I kill things? Why can't I jump on things? Why can't I destroy things? This is not a video game. Artists are usually a little bit more tactful. They don't say it's not art. They just kind of often roll their eyes back a little bit, or they say, yeah, my son plays Minecraft, or my partner plays Bejeweled, and they don't really make space. Like, they immediately close off when they hear video game. So much so that I often don't say it anymore. I often don't say video game because I know that I'm going to turn away the people that I'm most excited about talking to, people who are curious about the potentiality, the possible futures of experimental play and art. And then I attract the people who are the least interested in what I'm actually doing, who are looking for like Halo, or who are looking for another very amazing corporate game that I have never played and have no interest in. When I think about the future of games, I think that we've only just begun to embark on what's possible with games. We have been so limited in what we consider to be games. There are gatekeepers firmly holding the gates. This is a game. It's only a game if it has a goal. It's only a game. I mean, when I'm explaining games to people, I often say so that it's base. What most people consider a game is something that has a goal, and then you're trying to get there, but something is making it difficult. This is a game, but I mean, I feel that games can be so much more than that. And I wish these gatekeepers wouldn't be so aggressive about gatekeeping what is and what isn't a game. And I really feel like in the future, and we're already headed in this direction, there's going to be a lot more space in the arts for games. I think we'll move beyond the embarrassment that we have right now, that is sometimes people wanting just their thing but gamified. Like gamify our thing so people will like it, or people wanting an experience that they can claim is like an empathy machine. So take somebody's poverty trauma, or take somebody's trauma and then just force people who are not experiencing that into like a model of it, and then that's the point of games. I'm hoping and I'm thinking we're definitely going to move beyond that and move into a space where we can experiment with games as much as people have been allowed to experiment with, let's say, painting. Like, what is a painting, or like some of the more interesting like service art or art as care, or like some of the places that art has gone in the past, that there will be space for games to enter and occupy and build new spaces like that. As infinite as these possibilities for play are, people swinging in vines over a river, people singing in a made-up language to their cats, people inventing strange games with rocks, making potions, as infinite as these childhood possibilities of play are, is as infinite as like the play space for making experimental games will be in the future. When considering funding and resources, it's a pretty sticky situation no matter where you're coming from. In my experience working with arts funders, it was just a nightmare. Working as like a DIY community organizer, I struggled so hard to get funding for my projects and found myself unable, like hitting closed doors over and over and over again, and then working with partners who were getting the same funding, and just feeling so frustrated. I mean, I had an audience of thousands and thousands and thousands of people all across Canada. I was putting on shows in every province and territory at the same time. We had 600 volunteers excited about the work we were doing, and still we couldn't get a cent of funding. And other organizations that were struggling to bring 5-10 people into a room that didn't have that same kind of connection with an audience were getting institutional or like annual funding. And that was incredibly frustrating. I mean, I don't want them to lose their funding, but I felt like it was very difficult to get funding for me in the arts as like a DIY arts person. And games in some ways are even worse. I mean, your options are trying to apply for arts funding and probably getting rejected because a lot of the jurors think that games aren't art, or working with a publisher, which is can be a very raw deal. I mean, if you make it big, it can go very well, but there are some interesting Twitter threads that I could link to from game developers who decided not to sign with publishers because the terms are so intense and it's very difficult. And a lot of the Canadian funding institutions for games, it's more of a loan. They see it as a business. There isn't a lot of room for experimentation. It's like, you better make something successful. It's a lot more organized for people who want to make AAA games than it is for people who want to make experimental or arty type things. My personal feeling on funding, I have conflicting thoughts on this, but my personal feeling on funding is that if it's tax money, it should go towards things that serve and move people, which is not to say that it's like should be a populist thing. Like maybe we need to make a new system after this doesn't work, but I think we should at least try to fund things that serve the citizens or the people, and not just the ones who are paying tax, but also the ones that can't pay tax because they don't have money. The people that live on the land, or the people who are there, should have access to the things that move them, the art that moves them, and more importantly, have access to making art. So my personal feeling on art is that we should fund resources for people to make art, fund space, fund time, fund mentorship, fund spaces for people to make art. That's how I feel. I do think that if we made my whole system, that maybe at some point I would think, okay, also we should fund these specific people who are making really interesting things. But maybe I wouldn't. I mean, if I were in charge, I'd probably like just tear down the whole economic system we have now. So it would be a totally different thing, and that's hard to imagine. But a few things I can say. Okay, so one thing that the arts could learn from games about funding is how to stretch a dollar. I think some arts organizations have very little funding and they're very good at stretching dollars, but some of them are wallowing in funding and they're really not making the most out of the money. Like they're really just, like a lot goes into like long bureaucratic meetings and systems that nobody even wants, not even the people who are there. Like people are getting paid to be miserable, basically. So that's one thing the arts could learn from games, is like how to stretch those dollars and make the most of them. Games could learn from the arts how to like rally for more funding. I mean, I think especially experimental art games could learn how to convince bodies that we deserve to be funded and that our experimentation needs to be funded, that we need to be able to make things that won't be successful. Like we need to be able to fail. Experimentation means at least as much failure as success, and probably like 95% failure and 5% getting where we want it to get. And that needs to be written into the funding models. Room for experimentation, room for failure. And if we fund resources, it will be. If we fund resources, that is what happens inherently. So that's a point for my point on funding resources. I'd also say, I feel that the funding models as they exist right now, despite people making really good efforts, both in the arts and in games, are inherently deeply racist, deeply sexist, deeply ableist, and deeply classist. That's a lot of words to say, but the way the systems are structured are really so that only certain types of people can access them. Yes, sometimes someone slips through the cracks and manages, like upwards through the cracks, and manages to get funding anyways, despite living with this disability, despite being racialized, they still manage to get that money, but it is so much harder. And I think our systems need a major overhaul. And I do think they should continue to exist. We need funding bodies. I love that this country has funding bodies, but I think we need to do real deep, meaningful work thinking about the systems through which people access funding. So no writing these weird mystical reports with ambiguous questions and making these budgets. Like, this is not going to work for a lot of people. We need a different system for people who don't have the background to understand how to do that. We need an absolutely different system for applying, and we need a different system for dissemination. I think one thing that has allowed indie game studios and experimental game developers to experiment is that it kind of, games right now exist outside of the structure in a way. Like, there's like a lot of newness. There's still like, I mean, it's old, you know, it's 10, 20 years old, 40 years old, some of this, but it's still very new. There's still a lot of space for people to say, this is what I do after my day job. This is what I do on weekends. There are tools that exist. There are game engines. There are so many tools that exist that allow someone to do a workshop for a weekend and make something. And I think that accessibility to tools, as well as this feeling that anyone can try, I mean, obviously it's not anyone ever, but that people can try, like when compared to the arts, where at some age, a lot of people are told, oh, you're not a good artist. Like, that person over there is a good artist, you're a bad artist. And so the bad artists, they become audience members, or they become people that think that the arts funding should be cut. Whereas games, I don't know, it's still new enough that nobody's telling people you're not the game designer, it's that person over there. So I think that's one reason why it's easier to do experimentation as a game designer. And I think another reason why it's easier to do experimentation as a game designer is this thing we talked about earlier, that when you're a game designer, most game designers, not all, your audience or the people that you're working with are involved from the very beginning. So you can't get too attached to an idea. You have an idea and you put it in front of someone and they say, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. And you write on the page, touch the left arrow, and the person touches the left arrow on the word left arrow on the screen with their finger. And you say, touch the left arrow on your keyboard, and they touch it once and lift their finger up right away. And so I think working with people from the very beginning allows game designers to be more experimental. So the arts, we're talking about the arts again, it's a monolith. It's so many different things. What is encapsulated in the arts is so much. But I think in general, all arts could learn a little bit from experimental game design, from thinking about play and thinking about interactivity. I mean, in my work, I'm working towards a future where we're connected in ways that are currently unimaginable. That's what I'm working towards. I believe that this is our future. We're going to be deeply, intensely connected. And if current trends persist, we're going to be deeply, persistently, constantly, totally connected and incredibly lonely at the same time. And for me, one of the reasons I've always been excited about the arts is because for me, it reaches through some of that loneliness. The arts are one of the only places I've ever felt truly connected to another human being, through music, through visual art, through any kind of art, through dance, through movement. In those moments, I feel connected to people. And so I think if we are to look at playfulness as a way of being in the world, of like a form of existence, and look at the potentiality of art to touch people, that our work right now is really urgent. And I know everyone says their work is urgent, but I look around and I see a lot of people in a lot of pain, a lot of people increasingly lonely, tech oligarchs looming over top of us, controlling our every moment, understanding what our eyeballs are doing on the screen, hiring the best psychologists in the world to help them work with our brains to like trick us into doing things that serve their interests. And I think we have urgent work to do in the arts of like reaching people and connecting with people and creating new space. And yeah, I wish we would talk more about that. I want to say that I am very excited about working with people. And I'm not the only person who makes games that is excited about working with people. I want to work with people. And when I think, I don't want to make a straw man of an arts organization. Maybe I'll make like a paper doll of an arts organization that's in my mind that I've interacted with before. It's not one, it's like many all jammed together of some people who are burnt out because they've been working for years and years, are intensely fearful. They feel like they're losing audiences, they're losing funding, they feel like no one cares about what they're doing, and are exhausted and are like trying new things but feeling like they're flailing. I want to say to people who are hearing that and recognizing themselves in it, oh, and again, like angry at their social media manager for not getting them their audience somehow, like blaming the person, the intern who's like 21 and making minimum wage for not like getting a viral TikTok or something. Like that person, if you see yourself in that, I want to say there's like so much room. There's actually so much that we could do together, not just me personally, but like people who are interested in engagement, interactivity, and play. We can move way beyond just gamifying something or like trying to trick people. Like we can find ways to like find the people, make threads, connect with audiences, and have them be an active part of the audience. It is possible. You don't have to suffer. That's all.